and thanks for staying with Bernama TV. Happy Labour Day. Now, before we begin, the Malaysian National News Agency Bernama was honoured with the Best Media Agency Award at the National Labour Day 2025 celebration earlier today. The award recognises Bernama's outstanding role in delivering accurate, timely and trustworthy information to the public across various news platforms. Now, to commemorate this special day, I'll be speaking with HETAL DOSHI, an organisational psychologist, and we discuss work reimagined for the next generation. And later on, I'll speak to Professor PHAR BENG, who joins us to share his perspective on the Singapore elections and what it means for ASEAN. I'm Melissa Ong, you're watching The World on Bernama TV. As we observe Labour Day, we reflect on the value of work, the rights of workers, and how the world of work is evolving. But it also raises an important question. What does work look like for the next generation? Now, across industries, younger professionals are entering the workforce with new expectations. They seek flexibility, purpose, and balance, yet many are also grappling with burnout, limited growth opportunities, and a disconnect with traditional workplace norms. Now, to help us look at these shifts and how we can build better work experiences, I'm joined by organizational psychologist and CEO of O-PSYCH, HETAL DOSHI. She recently led the rollout of the 2025 Wellbeing at Work Index in Malaysia. Hi HETAL, happy Labour Day to you. Thanks for doing this. I'd like to start here. What is the 2025 Wellbeing at Work Index in Malaysia, and what is it telling us about the younger workforce these days?
Okay, so the Wellbeing at Work Index measures how employees are coping with the stress at work, what their quality of work life is, and also how the relationships are in the workplace. And the data that we found from the 2025 Wellbeing at Work Index reveals a very concerning trend, especially for the younger workforce, who represents the most vulnerable group across all other age segments. They record the lowest overall well-being score at about 60%, which is about 10% lower than the other age groups. And from 2023 to 2024, it has declined by 4%, and the 2025 Q1 results don't look great for them either. This trend has gone on from 2022 up until 2024, and the younger workforce is suffering the most. The highest rising risk factor among them is meaning of work, job satisfaction, and possibilities of development. Essentially, it's an existential question for them where is this giving me meaning? Am I actually feeling the satisfaction that I thought I should have in a job like this after studying so hard? And do I think that the opportunities are going to be potentially valuable for me as well? This is a signal that not only are they currently struggling more than their colleagues, but it's an increasingly widening gap year on year. It's a very, very critical time for leaders to consider how we can rethink how we engage, support, and empower young talent, but also how we need to educate or maybe re-educate the younger talent about how they can create a better work life for themselves, obviously in the workforce.
Now, why do you think this is happening, and what makes this different from perhaps your or my generation?
I just definitely want to say that this is no generational bashing over here. I'm sure our generation or every generation thinks that the next generation is not doing too well and could be doing better. But I think why this is happening is when we were looking at the report and really deeply looking at the findings, we coined a term, Professor Kenny and myself, who both worked on the report, we coined a term called the Great Disillusionment, which is this profound experience of what I think work will be versus what it actually is. And what I think work would be, what work could be, has been shaped by cultural narratives, social media, and well-intentioned messaging about find your passion, do what you love, YOLO. But actually, the reality is that as it is Labour Day today, the word labor itself reminds us of the reality that work at its core is hard, demanding, sometimes it's thankless, and really at the end of the day, an economic transaction as well. And so while there is this romanticized version of what work should be, versus the reality that it is difficult, creates this sense of betrayal and this sense of feeling misled about after studying so hard, is this what truly is going to be about, and is this going to rig me against my own future?
Right, and do you think that this gap will continue to widen between what younger workers expect from a job and what most jobs are really like? As we can see, most of the younger generation, I mean, this is just generally speaking, they prefer work like being a content creator perhaps, and rather than traditional jobs. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the gap is definitely going to widen because the world has moved into a pace at which we do not have so much of attention to be able to go through a very resilient, long process. The other thing is that I think organizations themselves are doing a disservice by throwing a fantasy about what the vision of the company is or what the reality of it could look like, but actually isn't. So when organizations say that, we want to create environmental progress and sustainability, but how they behave on the day-to-day does not really fit that meaning at all. So one of the main things that I think organizations need to do is to stop pretending that work is as flowery as sometimes we make it be, and to pretend that also that work is family. I think Netflix, for example, does a very, very good job at being very real about who they are, that performance culture is absolutely here to stay, and it is over and above everything else. And they attract talent that are interested in operating within that specific realm. So, the disillusionment will continue, and people will continue to feel very uncomfortable and unhappy in the workplace until and unless we sit down and talk about the truth of what work actually could look like for both parties in a relationship.
Now, interestingly, you touch on the performance culture, and well, this is very true. But how do we then balance support for young employees with making sure accountability isn't lost and they do perform, but yet they don't feel demotivated or just being overswamped with work?
So I think in essence, one of the major things to focus on is that an organization or workplace exists because a problem needs to be solved and work needs to be done. That should be the number one priority. At the same time, organizations must have the highest level of empathy and also the psychological safety to facilitate conversations between themselves and employees, and within employees between each other as well, about what is the smallest things that we can do for each other to create a better work life, given things that are within our control. And these are conversations that in the time that we've worked with organizations, whenever we ask employees, and not about feedback about the organization, but what is it that you want that would be helpful? It takes on average an employee about 13 to 15 minutes to even figure out actually what is it that I really want in terms of support that would help me. And 13 minutes is a long time. So I think skill development of organizations to create psychological safety to have these conversations, but also skill development for employees to be able to articulate what it is that they need that is within the control of the organization so that they can continue to thrive as well. The future will not be about feedback. The future will not be about engagement. The future will all be about psychologically safe conversations that can be supportive to achieve the intended outcome. So high performance without compromising well-being and without compromising work experience as well. In fact, the whole idea is how do we make the difficulties worth it for all of us?
Right. And with your area of work and your interaction with employers, do you think that they are ready and, going all out to engage with their employees to find out actually what is happening and how they can improve their work satisfaction?
Yes, 100%. I sense most, if not all, organizations and leaders are desperate in their wanting to understand deeply, but where it is compromised in how do they actually act on this understanding, if at all. And so I definitely do sense it, and our data also shows that leaders are progressively becoming more afraid of the employees rather than the other way around. And so the power has shifted, and there is a huge need and want and a desire for leaders to engage better. And they're doing, I think, anything and everything to make sure that that is well protected. Again, the issue would be that this is a literacy thing, meaning that leaders may not be literate, equipped, skilled enough to be able to do that, which is why it's very, very important to for organizations to embark on hardcore literacy when it comes to well-being or employee experience.
Well, thank you, HETAL, for your insights. Happy Labor Day to you.
Thank you.
Now, if you found this conversation meaningful, share it with a colleague, start a dialogue in your workplace, and let's keep the conversation going. The future of work starts with all of us. I'm off for a quick break right now, and I'll be back with Professor PHAR Kim Beng, and he will be joining us shortly. This is The World on Bernama TV. Welcome back with me, Melissa Ong. Now, as Singapore prepares to head to the polls on May 3rd, the nation finds itself at the intersection of domestic recalibration and shifting global dynamics. Economic uncertainty, geopolitical rivalry, and leadership transition are converging at a critical moment, not just for Singaporeans, but for a region closely watching how the city-state positions itself amid global headwinds. Now, to unpack the broader implications of this pivotal election, we're joined by Professor PHAR Kim Beng, Professor of ASEAN Studies at International Islamic University of Malaysia. Thanks for joining us, Prof. I'd like to begin with this. Prof, with Singapore going to the polls this Saturday, May 3rd, what are the key domestic issues influencing voters, and how do they intersect with broader global tensions?
For what it's worth, the cost of living will actually be one of the key issues. And then there's also the issue of Singaporeans feeling the heat of unable to find cheaper and affordable housing. So the issues that Singaporeans are struggling with are basically those that are very, very closely connected to what is known as the middle income trap. Now, what is unique about this general election is that it was not expected until the end of this year. However, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has decided to call for a snap general election in light of the growing economic turbulence generated by the taxation and the tariff measures that have been arbitrarily imposed by the United States and on the rest of the world, including Singapore, with a threshold of 10%.
Right, Prof, in our conversation earlier, you have pointed out Singapore's GDP exposure to global trade at 360%. With President Trump now back in office and his protectionist stance in full swing, how might this impact Singapore's economic positioning and voter sentiment?
Well, if the Singaporeans are actually savvy and sophisticated about the very issue that you just mentioned, which is the exposure of their GDP up to about 360% to external shocks and events, then what they should be thinking of are issues concerning the stability of the multilateral trade system, the viability of the World Trade Organization, and the extent to which the United States, China, and even European Union are able to reconcile their differences. Because right now what you have are some inklings of potentially a trade deal, but also the rumors of a trade war, a full-blown trade war, have not been completely dismissed yet by Washington, D.C. And in that sense, Singapore is actually at the precipice of their own existential existence. And to a large extent, ASEAN is affected by the turbulence and the dynamics that is going on around the world right now.
Now, is this election, in your view, becoming a de facto referendum on how the PAP manages external economic threats, particularly in light of the renewed US-China trade strain? Your thoughts on this?
Well, I like your questions that you put to me, that this is actually a referendum on PAP. But the significance of this general election in Singapore is actually a lot larger than what you just described. It's actually a referendum of the world per se, because Singapore, for what it's worth, is actually a multiracial and a cosmopolitan city. And occasionally, the likes of Professor Ken Calder at Johns Hopkins University referred to Singapore as a state city, not merely a city-state. So when Singaporeans actually go in droves to vote for the new government on May 3rd, are they actually reflecting the fear and the insecurities of the people around the world? Not unlike the people in Malaysia too, because we also define ourselves as a trading state. And in many ways and sectors, Malaysia is lagging behind in science, technology, and innovation, something which Professor Raja Rasya specializes in. Now, will Singaporeans be sufficiently aware of the stakes on the table with regards to their future?
Now, let's talk a little bit about PM Lawrence Wong and his leadership is often associated with continuity given his ties to Lee Kuan Yew. How might his leadership style shape Singapore's response to a more perhaps fragmented global economic system right now?
Well, to his credit, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong have tried to imbibe and also emulate all the finest examples that have been taught or even transmitted to him by his mentor, which was mentor Minister Lee Kuan Yew. But then every generation requires a leader of a different style, substance, and pedigree, because the issues keep changing and the electoral demography also changes according to that dynamic. So Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, based on what I can observe, is trying to pull away from being totally similar to Lee Kuan Yew, but at the same time exhibit all the urgency and the sense of importance that Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew used to put on the importance of ruling Singapore like a country that actually counts on having that sense of paranoia that if you don't govern Singapore well, you are actually likely to disappear from the face of the earth, if I may put it that dramatically. So there is that element that has always been in the mind of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew or mentor Minister Lee, which Lawrence Wong is trying to emulate and display. And he's doing it out of his sincere conviction. But that having been said, the Singaporean generation right now is a lot more sturdier and stronger. Therefore, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has to make it more compassionate and more thoughtful and conscientious, not unlike the way he handled the pandemic a few years ago, which catapulted him to the very top of the Singapore leadership transition.
Now, Prof, you mentioned Canada once voting as a stand against Trump's policies. It'll be interesting to know, could Singapore's election result be interpreted as a subtle signal to the world about ASEAN's broader stance on global trade and diplomacy?
Well, that will depend on the electoral outcome on this Saturday, on May 3rd. The threshold that the PAP government is actually looking for is to have a popular votes of above 60.1%, and that was actually considered low by PAP standard in 2011. Now, even when Prime Minister Lawrence Wong can actually galvanize the Singapore population and go above the magic number that I just mentioned, which is 60.1, then that would be considered a definite win and the strongest mandate that any Singaporean can give and provide to his incoming government.
Now, lastly, Prof, if the PAP stabilizes or increases its popular vote share, what message does that send, not just internally, but to ASEAN neighbours watching how Singapore navigates this turbulent global climate?
Well, from my professional standpoint, that would actually send a very strong message to the rest of the region that unity is extremely important, not unlike what Professor Wong Gong Wu at National University of Singapore, or the Chairman Emeritus of the East Asian Institute, has mentioned a few days ago, that in light of the crisis that is now facing the world, it's actually very, very important for all the countries around the region to consolidate themselves into one single unit. without which you can never actually lay claim to calling Southeast Asia and ASEAN community, let alone a region that can cohere with any high degree of centrality at all. So to the degree, and this is my professional view, if and when the Singaporeans can actually push the popular votes above 60.1% for the current PAP government, that is the clearest sign that they are actually aware of the stakes that are facing them right now, posed by Washington, D.C., but it is also a signal to the rest of the people in the region to take the lead and the example. And Malaysia would be watching this election very carefully because we are the chair of ASEAN. And Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim and Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has had a very long phone call recently, more than an hour, I think, trying to make sure that both sides understand each other.
Right, and of course, in every election, a voter turnout will be one of the primary, concern. What do you think? Do you think that Singaporeans will vote in full force this time?
Well, Melissa, for what it's worth, I feel that this is one of those elections that the Singaporeans shouldn't miss out on voting, come rain or sun, because the stakes are actually extremely high. The issues that are put before them may not be as dramatic as the issues or the manner by which the ex-Mentor Minister Lee Kuan Yew used to put to the Singaporeans that this is not a game of cards and this is not a game of chance, that Singapore has to constantly look out into the horizon and be able to stay cautious and prudent in handling any kind of seismic pressures and risks emerging from the international trading system.
Right, thank you, Prof, for sharing your insights. We hope to speak with you again soon, perhaps once the election results are out. Happy Labor Day to you, Prof. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you, Melissa.
Before we end, here's a special message from our CEO, Datin Paduka Nurul Afida Kamaluddin, who honours the dedication and sacrifice of all Bernama staff. She extends her deepest appreciation to every team member for their unwavering commitment in upholding Bernama's excellence and urges everyone to carry this spirit forward and continue driving the agency to greater heights. We at the English Current Affairs team once again congratulate Bernama on being honoured with the Best Media Agency Award, and we wish everyone a happy Labor Day. As usual, don't forget to visit Bernama.com and follow us on all our social media channels. This has been The World on Bernama TV. I'm Melissa Ong. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.
Bekerja tiada istana megah, tanpa bekerja negeri tidak berbela, tanpa bekerja ekonomi